Hello everybody, this is Purge, bringing you guys something a little new here. This is for Morphling in the new patch. I know there's a lot of heroes floating around that have gotten some modern changes. There's a lot of people out there that don't understand how to play them, and as such, because those heroes have low win rates, people think that they're bad heroes. And I don't think that's the case at all for a lot of heroes. I think Pangolin has a place in the game. I think Morphling is extremely good right now, and I'm sure that's the case for a lot of other heroes that were reworked enough to make it feel like the hero's completely different, but that's not the case. So, to cover Morphling a little bit, let's talk about his changes, his positives, and his negatives. Right now with Morphling, the most important change that happened to him is that morphing your agility to strength and your strength to agility causes 0 mana. In the past, it used to cost a lot of mana, and as a result, if you needed to adjust your stats at all, it reduces your mana pool, which limited your ability to do anything else, like cast Waveform, cast Replicate, use Adaptive Strike, E-Blade people, all that stuff. And as such, the common item build in the past for Morphling was always Lincolns really early. Very, very commonly did they get Lincolns. Yes, Lincolns also did spell block things, but the primary reason for purchasing it is that it gave you 15 to all stats, including int, as well as strength and agility, of course, and it also gives you a lot of HP and mana regen, which basically means that you can be on the map longer, and you have a bigger mana pool to continuously morph stats without feeling like, oh man, I morphed stats, it's going to take forever for that 200 mana to come back. So, that's why it's so important that Morphling's stat shift doesn't cost mana anymore. It makes a big difference on his hero, because it means that he can fight longer. The other cool thing that changed was his Adaptive Strike. It's now 2 abilities instead of just 1. Before, the way it would work is, if you have lots of strength, more strength and agility, 50% more, it would stun your opponents for up to like 4 or 5 seconds or something really long. Now, because it's split, that means that you get the benefits of the damage nuke if you have more agility, and you get the benefits of the strength stun if you have more strength. So the fact that they're 2 different abilities makes a big impact, because with the addition of morph costing no mana, it's also gone up by a much bigger shift. It shifts way more stats per second than it did in the past. So now you can basically, throughout a fight, you can end up using both abilities to full ability here. So you can use the Adaptive Strike to do damage, and then you can morph stats halfway through the fight, during the fight, waveform through, for example, and push your opponent back to deal damage. And then you can shift back to agility again. And all you've lost in this combo was you've casted Adaptive Strike 2 times, 3 times maybe for some of you, and a waveform, which is way less mana expensive than having to cast a spell, morph your stats, use it again, morph your stats, use it again. That would be way too mana expensive with the previous Morphling, but now it's possible, and the stats shift so fast that it's entirely a plausible thing to happen. So here's a clip example from me playing mid. This was one of the earlier games here. I waveformed forward because I had a regen, and then I realized I waveformed into a lot of danger. So just take a look at my mana throughout this whole thing. I've been morphing stats this whole time. I only have 2 points right now, but it basically means that as long as I don't get bursted down, that I'm going to be fine. Whenever I get close to dying, I just continue to morph my stats more towards strength, because it buys me more HP. So essentially right now, the only limiters you have in a team fight are your raw HP, basically, how fast you can morph strength, and what kinds of disables your opponents have. Now, the disables you really need to worry about if you're playing Morphling are silences, because if they silence you before you start morphing, you cannot morph. But if they stun you, slow you, do whatever, most regular disables will allow you to still morph. Here's another example of a fight where I initiated with my team. Keep in mind, this is about the same items that I had before. I've only got a wand, a bottle, a wraith band, and a robe of the magi here. But again, my goal is I want to stay with them until I can keep waveforming. And most heroes actually do work like this, like supports if you think about them. Their goal is basically to stay alive long enough to cast their spells multiple times. But if I can do that by bottling, by morphing to get more HP if I need it, then I've got no problems here. The only negatives are that if I heavily strength morph, that I have less armor, and I don't do nearly as much damage or attack speed. So now I'm dipping below the enfeeble range, for example. But the really cool thing is that you just keep waveforming and keep waveforming and waveforming. 11-second cooldown, it's something that moves you in addition to accomplishing kills, and ultimately makes you a better hero. So in this moment, what I did is I replicated the Monkey King to stay alive. I'll talk a little bit more about Replicate in a second, but it's not nearly the same ability that it used to be. In the past, the way that Replicate worked was you would make an illusion of an ally or an enemy, and that Replicate would stay alive for a certain amount of time. And if I ever want to teleport to where that Replicate is and become it, it costs me a large amount of mana. So the way that Replicate was used in the past was as a I need to get across the map really fast, or a I want to split push and have a Replicate somewhere and teleport to it when things get dangerous. And it was okay as an ability, but it wasn't really, I wouldn't even call it an ultimate very much. And Morphling's ultimate now is still kind of subpar compared to a lot of other ultimates, but The problem with the previous one is that it just added to your hero's mana problems, and also made Morphling very hard to kill, which was a hard thing to balance, because if you ever didn't stun him or silence him, he replicates out and gets out, which is really annoying to play against. The other solution against him was mana drain him so much that he can't morph and he can't use his ultimate. So because they removed the mana cost on morph now, it would be super overpowered if his ultimate still functioned the same way as before. He would basically be unkillable in almost all circumstances, which wouldn't be fair or fun to play against. I'm actually completely happy they removed his ultimate. I didn't think it was very fun. Yes, you could use Boots of Travel to like easily get back to Fountain, but there's better ways actually that you can regen now with the change to morph. So let's talk about those really quick. Alright, so the one way that morphing is really strong right now is, again, it doesn't cost you anything to actually heal. So if we take a look at this clip here, I'm missing about 1,000 HP, and as I morph to strength, what it's doing is increasing my max HP by 20, but it's also increasing my current HP by 20 per strength. So basically, when you're morphing up and down, there's really no difference in your raw HP missing. Your percentage HP doesn't stay the same, because if that happened and you were really low on strength and you started morphing strength, you wouldn't actually gain that much more strength per level. So the way that it works is, it's just adding to your max and your min. So the way that you abuse this is this. You need to morph your strength all the way to agility when you're ready to heal. And by doing this, you don't want to stop right before the 0 mark. What you actually want to do is keep going. Because again, as you morph, it adds the numbers. That means when you morph it the other way from strength to agility, that means that once it gets down to 1, it can't kill you. So technically your lower bound damage taken stays the same. So if I continue morphing past that threshold and max myself out at 91 agility, that means now I'm only missing 339 damage. So that means if I morph all the way to agility before I use my bottle charges, if I pop 3 bottle charges now, it heals me a much bigger percentage than it did before. So now with new Morphling, I think Bottle is super overpowered, not only just because there's 2 bounty runes that are close by, but because morphing doesn't cost mana. You couldn't easily do this before, because morphing your strength and agility all the way around would cost you a buttload of mana. So yes, you could get HP, but it wouldn't offset the mana that you lose. So now you can use this to abuse and heal. I didn't figure this out until I was prepping for this guide, so in all the Morphling games I played, I didn't really abuse this correctly. I would basically morph all the way till my HP bar was low, but I didn't keep going past that point, and I should have, because it technically heals you. The only dangerous part is that in that short period of time is whether or not you get ganked or not. And once you heal all the way down, you can morph your strength back up, and all of a sudden, you've used 3 bottle charges to heal a ridiculous amount of HP. And if I do this one more time, I can even show you guys how fast it is. You basically need to go all the way down to 0, and as soon as you're there, you're good to go. You can morph up and you can bottle instantly. It doesn't actually delay you much. So because you morph so fast, there's only this small fraction of time where you're at 0 strength, and at that point, you're good to go. You instantly put your strength up, you pop your bottle charges, and you lose nothing. It's extremely easy, basically, to disengage from a fight, go to some runes, morph all the way down to 0. This is assuming you have 4 points in morph, of course. Heal, and then as soon as you hit 0, you pump your strength back up, like, I don't know, 20 points or something, pop 2 or 3 bottle charges, grab a bounty rune, pop 2 more bottle charges, you're fully healed. So even though you can't use BOTs to replicate, make a replicate, TP back home, and jump back in, or even just a TP scroll, you can't do that anymore. But it really doesn't matter, because you can just buy a bottle instead, go find a rune or 2 bounty runes when they spawn, and you've got 4 bottle charges, and that should be enough to heal your hero. This isn't going to work as well late game when you have all these stat items that give you strength, like E-Blade, Scotty, Lincoln's, things like that. Those are going to interfere with this being abusable, but I think if you're not buying a bottle on Morphling right now, you are making a huge mistake, because you can easily abuse this to stay on the map longer and to elongate your team fights. So let's go back and talk about Replicant now. We haven't really covered its uses very well enough yet. I did use it to save myself when I was turned into the Monkey King for a stun, but that's basically what you need to do. Here's an example of how not to use it. I waveformed in on the Zeus. I turned into him because I was expecting to use his spells and all that stuff, but my mistake here was that I was expecting to have the mana pool or something like what he had, but again, it's tied to what mana you have. So when I waveformed in like that, I waveformed in at very low HP, at very low mana, so once I transform into him, I didn't really have the mana to cast his spells. So that's one of the limiters of the new ultimate. Your int is lowered at the start of the game to offset not needing morph as much, so if you don't have like power treads that you can turn into int, or maybe like a big int item, then you're going to have trouble turning into somebody and casting their spells. Here's a better example of me using this correctly. This is a game that was going pretty well. I didn't have very good last hits, but I initiate the fight by waveforming. I turn into a Vengeful Spirit, use his stun, and then I turn back. And this might seem kind of like stupid, like, oh man, I only ultied for like 2 seconds and then I used a spell and I was done. I don't think that matters. I think it's a really cool design because it basically allows you to look around the fight and see what basic abilities you want to steal. In that game, I could have basically turned into a Spirit Breaker, used Charge to charge away. I could have turned into Tiny to Avalanche Toss. I could turn into a Razor, use Static Link for a couple seconds, and then turn back again. I could turn into Bloodseeker to have Thirst, his passive that makes you run really fast. I could use that in a fight to escape, to chase, lots of things like that. There's all these options, and yes, in some ways it's kind of similar to Rubik now, but his ultimate is such a long cooldown right now because it's basically free skill points. Because if I waveform in on a Vengeful Spirit, and then I stun him with his own stun, I basically am trading my 1 ultimate skill point for 4 of his magic missile skill points. I also should have used Wave of Terror afterwards, but I didn't. The other important thing to remember is you can turn back any time that you're not silenced, and you can't morph while you're them. So you don't usually want to stay their hero very long. Every time that I did that, I ended up dying and feeding, in a lot of cases. So your gameplay should be focused around using waveform a lot, occasionally stealing their abilities to enhance your ability to kill, and just trying to stay alive in fights, provide your team longevity, essentially. Here's another example where we're team fighting, and we're trying to catch Tiny here. I used my Adaptive Strike to interrupt his potential Blink Dagger. Blitz was able to catch up, but then he used Force Staff. I turned into Tiny, I tossed the Clockwork in, and I used Avalanche Toss. Tiny has really good basic abilities that really made this easy. I also should have probably eaten a tree, because if I eat a tree, the buff stays after I become Morphling, and that buffs the damage that you do with your next attack. So I should have eaten a tree to have that. Alright, and just to round out the rest of the video, here's some examples of common team fights that exist, or that happened. Again, I'm very heavily agility morphed because I want my right-click damage and my attack speed to be really good. And if things get scary, I just shift a little bit more towards strength. In this case, the Tiny's going to end up running away, and I get blocked off, so I just go back to farming. But I'm basically just here to do as much damage as possible. So in this example, I'm playing kind of aggressive, my opponents come to pressure me, and this whole time I'm taking damage, I'm morphing HP to stay alive. But the reality is that they've done damage to me, but all this is doing is buying my team time to show up. And again, it's important that you continue to waveform through your opponents as much as possible. Now I'm looking to contribute if possible. I turn into Avenge to use his stun, but the mistake I made here was that while I turned into him, I wasn't able to morph. And it might have honestly been very good to just take over Razor instead, because if I take Razor, I can take damage, and then I can turn back into Morphling, and after that's done, after I transform back into me, I still have Static Link buff. So there's a lot of cool skills that you can steal. Here's an early game fight here. Again, I've only got Treads, Wand, Aquila, and Bottle. I kind of look at this as Morphling's core right now. I think this is, you only need like 2 of these items. I think Treads is really effective on the hero, but you don't need that many items for him to be able to fight because the mana costs are just not what they used to be. So just very important that you use waveform on int treads whenever you can. I ended up missing the Bane here in the previous fight, or in the previous waveform, but we still end up killing him. I'm going to de-aggro whenever possible, bottle 3 damage whenever it's possible, and again, waveform through enemy heroes. If I can attack people, I will, but generally I'm just hanging out, waiting until my waveform is ready to go again. Things are getting a little scary, so I'm going to start morphing. That was a little bit too close, but... And I maybe could have gone back in on the Zeus here. I think it's a possibility, but I didn't. So that's pretty much how Morphling is played right now. You do have some initiation problems that you didn't have before, because the waveform range is basically your only way to initiate now. But they kind of buffed this in the last patch where they buffed up the waveform range at level 10. I always get that perk, and I think it's kind of mandatory because it helps you to escape and initiate better. Because you can't rely on your ultimate basically to reposition your hero. Sometimes you can replicate like an anti-mage or a Queen of Pain and blink out of danger, or a Mirana to leap out of danger. I've done that before as well, but it's not always something you can rely on. So you need to be a little bit careful sometimes when you initiate. You have to know what things your opponents have. So now that we've kind of covered all the basics of the hero, and you guys will hopefully play him more like he used to be played, I think you're going to find that he's actually still pretty good. I think the items that you should buy after those early basics should pretty much be a faster version of what you bought earlier on Morphling. So in the past, again, you had to go Linken's first because you needed mana, HP regen, stuff like that. I don't even think Linken's is needed anymore. I think Linken's is good because it gives you HP regen and mana, but I think the bottle is so abusive and it costs so much less than a Linken's. I think that just a simple bottle is the way to solve those issues. So my build right now is I like getting bottle. I get the core of Power Treads, Wand, and Aquila just for raw stats, good damage, mana regen, stuff like that. And then I buy an E-Blade as fast as I can. And I think the reason that's really good is because E-Blade Rush in the past wasn't really viable because the mana costs were so high. If you shifted all the way to agility and then you got into some danger and you had to shift to strength while sitting on 500 HP, you lose so much mana pool that you might not have enough to do E-Blade, Adaptive Strike, and Waveform. But I know that because I don't have to worry about morphing, I can very easily rapidly morph before a gank, after a gank, all that stuff. It's not as big of a scare. So you can just go straight into the E-Blade. And once you have the E-Blade, it's really easy to get kills because with the Morphling waveform range, you look for a target, you wait till they're probably going to stand still, you waveform in, you cast E-Blade, you cast Adaptive Strike. And because you can get this so fast, and because you can very easily sit on full agility without worrying about HP problems, because again, you can shift faster and it costs no mana, it's really easy to move around getting kills. And after the E-Blade, the build that I like going is Shadowblade afterwards. In the past, Shadowblade was not really a conventional Morphling item. You'd pretty much always need like Lincoln's E-Blade or Lincoln's Manta, something like that that allows you to fight. But Morphling now is more diverse. You can do different things. The Shadowblade is good because it increases my damage and attack speed. It lets me deal slightly more damage when I wave through at level 15 with the level 15 perk, and I can turn it into a Silver Edge, which helps me deal with heroes that have annoying passives, like Anti-Mage, for example. And Silver Edge now gives you stats where it didn't. Silver Edge in the past really didn't exist as a Morphling item when Morphling was really popular, so I can buy it as a stat item that also helps me initiate my E-Blade ganks, also helps me evade team fights and stay alive long enough. It's just, I think the Shadowblade's a natural transition. If you're having a much rougher game, or you're trying to make support Morphling work, which, by the way, I don't think it's good. I've tried it a few times, not a fan. Blink Dagger can work as well, but I'm a much bigger fan of Shadowblade because you can easily deal with the mana costs. It'll help you get ganks off and move around the map very rapidly to get kills. From there on, if you're not going Shadowblade, the other items that you should keep in mind are Butterfly is an option if you need evasion and just raw attack speed and agility. I think a Scotty sometimes as a first major item after E-Blade is fantastic if you need more HP and maybe the slow that it comes with. It's very, very good. You can also go Lincoln's if you're having trouble. I think Manta can work, but I'm not the biggest fan because I'd prefer to just have maybe raw items that do more damage, but Manta is very good too. BKB is an option as well. Like if you need to deal with Orchids, it's either Manta, it's going to be Ghost Scepter or E-Blade yourself, it's going to be Shadowblade or BKB or Lincoln's. One of those items basically, depending on what kind of abilities you need to deal with to protect yourself. So late game items, keep buying Agi and stat items. I think there is some potential for going something like Monkey King Bar, Daedalus or something because your attacks can go through waveform. But in late game scenarios, you don't even really need a fancy gimmicky item like that. You can just actually go for max agility, waveform through waves, and they get one shot in the late game with your 15 perk. It's really efficient for farming and being effective. So yeah, that's basically Morphling. I really like buying Satanic in the ultra late game because it helps give me HP lifesteal. So in these super late game situations where I have a stupid amount of stats, I just kill everybody and stay alive using Satanic. And you can also obviously abuse it using stat adjustments on neutral camps even without using the active because your HP becomes so low. So Satanic is definitely one of the best items to get in the late game, but try to keep your hero in a realm of continuing to buy stat things. That way all of your base hero needs are better and better and better. And you're just safer if you're full Agi mode, for example. So that's Morphling. I'm a huge fan of him right now. I'm also going to make a replay commentary, even though this one was pretty long too. But feel free to check that out. I'll go through all of my thoughts in one of the games that I played Morphling, and I'll grab one of the ones that I thought was fairly balanced and enjoyable to watch. All right, thanks for watching, guys. Have a good day.